Hello, and welcome to the June 3rd Thursday program presented by the Hoover Presidential Foundation. I'm Jerry Flegel, President and CEO of the Foundation, and I'd like to start by thanking our partners in this program, the Herbert Hoover National Historic Site, the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library Museum, and the West Branch Public Library. Together, we can accomplish great things, like tonight's program, Lives, Fortunes, and Sacred Honor, Declaring Independence. When we began the Third Thursday series last year, we'd begin each program with a short reception in the Hoover Presidential Library lobby, where guests could meet, enjoy light appetizers, and chat with the evening speaker. Well, COVID-19 put an end to that for the time being, so we found other ways to bring you quality programs like this one via the internet. Now, for now, the Presidential Library remains closed to the public, and they're working on a plan for the gradual reopening. The good news is the National Historic Site grounds and historic buildings are now open to the public. However, the Visitor Center remains closed for the time being. The Hoover Presidential Foundation staff has been working from home, and we're going to return to the office in early July. In the meantime, if you need to reach us, just call or email us with any needs you may have. I'd like to encourage you to regularly check our website and Facebook page, as well as those for the library, historic site, and the West Branch Public Library for special program offerings that will pop up in the months ahead. As you view tonight's webinar, we invite you to enter questions through the Q&A feature you'll find along the edge of the screen. You may also vote for questions someone else has entered if you'd like to hear those answered. As we may not have enough time to answer all the questions provided, top vote getters will be asked first. So vote early and vote often. Just kidding. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Garrett Cloer, Chief of Interpretation and Cultural Resources at Herbert Hoover National Historic Site. Garrett has an MA in history with a focus on early America. He joined us here in West Branch last year and has held previous positions in the National Park Service at Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters National Historic Site, Minuteman National Historic Park, and Independence National Historic Park. Do you now see why Garrett is uniquely qualified to give this program, to give tonight, called Lives, Fortunes, and Sacred Honor, Declaring Independence? Garrett, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for those kind words. This is a new one for me, talking to folks through the computer. I'm sad I'm missing out on the reception, but happy I don't have to wear the mask. So go ahead. I think we'll get right started, because those of you who know me know that trying to talk about this period in 40 minutes, 30 or 40 minutes is a challenge. So let's see, get my PowerPoint to go. Here we are. Of course, I couldn't just start in 1775 or 1776. Independence for the United States is at least 12-year process, going back to 1763. 1763 is the end of the 7 Years' War, or as it was known in North America, the French and Indian War. Following that conflict is a war against Native Americans on the frontiers called Pontiac's War. After those wars, the British Parliament decided it needed to raise revenue from the colonies, but also to rationalize the administration of her colonial possessions. So what we're going to have over the next decade is sort of a roller coaster of rising tensions, followed by periods of calm, followed by another attempt from Parliament to do something, followed by protest, followed by calm. Starts in 1764 with the Sugar Act, followed quickly with the famous Stamp Act in 1765, which produces riots in all of the colonies up and down the East Coast. Parliament is going to back down in the face of those riots. They repeal the Stamp Act, but at the same time they pass the Declaratory Act, which states that Parliament has the right to bind the colonies in all cases whatsoever. People don't pay too much attention because the Stamp Act is gone, but in 1767-68, Parliament tries again under a new ministry with the Townshend Acts. Protests again so bad that in 1768, regular army troops are sent into Boston. We end up having rising tensions until the Boston Massacre in 1770. Things quiet down for a while again. Parliament tries another time with the Tea Act in 1773. This causes tea parties in major cities, again, in almost every colony. Most famous one, of course, is up in Boston. The following spring, in summer of 1774, there's a series of laws passed called the Coercive Acts to punish the colonies. This ends up causing the colonists to send delegates to Philadelphia in the fall of 1774 for what we know as the First Continental Congress. It meets in that building on the right-hand side of the screen as you're looking at it, known as Carpenter's Hall. Throughout this period and intensifying in these years of the mid-1770s, an insurgency grips the countryside. In April 19th, 1775, that insurgency erupts into open warfare at Lexington and Concord. That leads us again back to Philadelphia. In May, starting on May 10th, 1775, another meeting of the Continental Congress is going to start. It had been pre-planned, but when this meeting starts, very shortly after, delegates are going to hear that colonial blood and the blood of British soldiers had been spilled in Massachusetts and everything is going to change. So the first order of business for that Second Continental Congress in 1775 is defense, taking control of the war effort. In June, they are going to create the Continental Army. They're going to choose George Washington to become commander-in-chief of that army. In October, they will create the Navy. And in November, the Marine Corps. And yet, people are still not talking about independence. Despite the fact that people have been killed, despite the fact that they are creating an army, people are not talking about independence. But one of the great things about Congress, in maybe the 18th century, why I like it so well, is that they always have the need to tell us what they're thinking, why they're doing something. And on July 6th, Congress publishes the Declaration of the Causes and the Necessities of Taking Up Arms. The draft of this document was written by a young Virginia radical named Thomas Jefferson. It would be heavily edited by the more conservative Pennsylvania delegate, John Dickinson. And those two names will come up again in a little bit. On July 8th, 1775, something that Dickinson plays a heavy role in, Congress sends the Olive Branch petition. To give you an idea of the tenor of the Olive Branch petition, it begins, "We, your majesty's faithful subjects." It goes on to implore the king to step into this dispute between Parliament and his colonists and solve things. The king is not the center of protest in 1775. That's going to change, however, and the king partly does it himself. He's going to issue a proclamation in August of 1775 that declares the colonies to be an open and avowed rebellion. He calls on all the officers, civilian and military, of the colonial governments to exert their utmost endeavors to suppress the rebellion and bring the traitors to justice. Parliament goes further with the Prohibitory Act in December, which basically shuts off the colonies. All manner of trade and commerce, and these are commercial colonies at heart, is and shall be prohibited. John Adams wrote after these two events, "It throws 13 colonies out of the royal protection. It levels all distinctions. It makes us independent in spite of our supplications and entreaties. It may be fortunate that the act of independency should come from the British Parliament rather than the American Congress." So There's one possibility for declaring our independence. The British kick us out first. But I want to ask you to think for a few minutes. I'm not necessarily going to answer these questions, but I think they're good for us to think about. What is independence? What does it mean? What constitutes independence? Is it governing yourself? Is it not following the orders of someone else? Does it have to last for a certain period of time? Can it be ephemeral? What does it mean to declare it? In all honesty, declaring independence means nothing. You have to secure your independence. Depending on which date you choose that we are going to talk to in a few minutes, whether it's 1775, 1776, they could declare independence all they wanted to, but it doesn't mean anything until 1783, when the Treaty of Paris is signed and that independence is recognized by Great Britain. And all of those questions are going to will definitely affect your answer for the following, or the last one. When was independence declared? So I want to look at three possibilities. I'll give you my opinion on which one is best, what the drawbacks are for each of these possibilities, but you certainly can make, and I encourage you to make your own decision as well. I want to start with Continental Association. In my opinion, this is the most important document in American history that no one knows about. It is the product of the first Continental Congress. It was approved at the very end in October of 1774. And basically it returns to a time-tested policy of non-importation, essentially boycotts of British manufactured goods. The colonists were attempting, before turning to arms, the colonists repeatedly attempted to use economic weapons in their fights with Parliament. Article 11 is what makes the Continental Association different. It read that a committee be chosen in every county, city, and town by those who are qualified to vote for representatives in the legislature, whose business it shall be attentively to observe the conduct of all persons touching this association, and when it shall be made to appear to the satisfaction of a majority of any such committee that any person within the limits of their appointment has violated this association, that such majority do forthwith cause the truth of the case to be published in the Gazette, to the end that all such foes to the rights of British America may be publicly known and universally condemned as the enemies of American liberty, and thenceforth we respectively will break off all dealings with him or her. Now, they're not claiming to be an independent nation, but what they are doing is they are creating elected Republican bodies on a local basis to assume authority over the daily lives of people in those areas. Essentially, this is a constitutional settlement on a small scale. And if one looks only at government, this is one possibility. Now, you probably guessed from my explaining that sentence that I don't accept this as a declaration of independence. It is part of America, the evolution of American constitutionalism, in my opinion, but it does not attempt to form a long-lasting government. It doesn't claim that. The next possibility was one that many years later, this guy here, John Adams, would say to him was a declaration of independence. Now, there's reasons for that, and I'll explain that in a minute. But in a letter to his friend James Warren, the head of the Provincial Congress in Massachusetts, Adams said that this day, May 10th, 1776, this day the Congress has passed the most important resolution that ever was taken in America. That it was a resolution for the formation of local governments. States should make their own governments. And the reason for this was, whereas it is irreconcilable getting a little ahead of myself. This, I'm going to read from a preamble that John Adams got to write. Maybe this influences his view on the importance of this document. He wrote, whereas it is irreconcilable to reason in good conscience for the whereas it is irreconcilable to reason and good conscience for the people of these colonies to take the oaths and affirmations necessary for the support of any government under the Crown of Great Britain, and it is necessary that the exercise of any kind of authority under the said crown should be totally suppressed, in all the powers of government under the authority of the people of the colonies exerted for the preservation of internal peace, virtue, and good order, as well as to defend our lives, liberties, and property from the hostile invasions and cruel depredations of our enemies. Therefore, in other words, when the existing royal governments could no longer be trusted to govern the people, it be recommended to the several assemblies and conventions to institute such forms of government as to them shall appear necessary to promote the happiness of the people. Of course, Adams is from Massachusetts. In 1774, in Worcester, in western Massachusetts, colonists had risen up and stopped the functioning of all courts in the countryside of that colony. So Adams knew what he was talking about when he talked about the royal government ceasing to function. He was saying that when that government did not function, it was time for the states to make their own. So if you're not going to be following an existing government and creating your own, are you not declaring independence? Well, they didn't actually do that. They didn't declare independence from the empire. They just were saying they would not follow the existing imperial government. But it could very easily be argued that they were just creating a new imperial government to replace the old, but not breaking away from that empire. So finally, we get to the generally accepted period of declaring independence. And again, this doesn't happen overnight on July 4th. They didn't wake up and say, well, today's a good day to do it. In my opinion, what really kicks off what had been an evolving process, in May, the Virginia Convention sends instructions to its delegates in Congress that they should vote for and propose independence. And one of those delegates is going to stand up on the floor of Congress on June 7th, 1776, and propose that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states. Now, these were a bunch of politicians, and they've been arguing about this for a few months, but they still weren't ready to take the lead. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. One, they were good Republicans. They were waiting for instructions from their state on how they should vote. There's fear. Some people who were for independence didn't think it was the right time because the colonies were too weak. They needed more time to look for friends, to gain strength. Others just could not bring themselves to leave the empire when it came to it. My favorite deleted section of the Declaration, and I'll talk about that process in a minute, just a moment, but there are about 86 odd changes made by Congress to Jefferson's original draft. In one of those sections that was deleted, Jefferson wrote, "We must endeavor to forget our former love for them," talking about the British people, talking about the British Empire. For 140 years, these colonists had been proud, by and large, to be part of the most powerful, the most peaceful, the most liberty-loving empire in the world, and now they had to leave it. This was not an easy emotional decision. So they put it off, like all of us would do. However, they're preparing. On June 11th, after they decided to table the discussion until July 1st, they create a committee of 5. Now on that committee, famous names like Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, lesser known names like Roger Sherman from Connecticut and Benjamin Harrison. Sorry, not Benjamin Harrison. The guy from New York. Sorry. The committee functioned like every other committee that Congress created, as this was not an unusual occurrence. All of these documents that Congress had drafted were drafted by committee. Jefferson was chosen by the committee to draft it because most likely he was well known as a writer, and he was not sitting on nearly as many committees as the other people, so he had time to do it. On July 1st, Congress picks up the topic once again, and there's debate throughout the day. They're not able to vote by the end of the day because they wanted everybody to be on board. When you were making such a big decision, such a big leap into the unknown, they thought it was important that everyone should be on board. On July 2nd, one of the members of the Pennsylvania delegation, the aforementioned Dickinson, does not come in. And the Pennsylvania delegation then votes for independence. 12 of the 13 colonies will do so, but they're able to say it's unanimous because New York abstains. And that is because New York hadn't received instruction on how to vote, and they didn't feel like they could vote for independence. So now independence is voted on, which is why July 2nd was the day that John Adams wrote to his wife and said would be the day that would be celebrated well into the future. On July 3rd, they come back in and they take Jefferson's draft with a few changes that had been proposed by Adams and Franklin, and they go through it word by word. Jefferson said that they mangled his declaration. And like I said, they make 86 changes to it. The most notable one was a condemnation of the slave trade and the king and empire's role in that. Finally, on July 4th, Congress is going to accept the text of the declaration. They adopt that declaration and they order it to be printed. And that declaration looks like this. Now, this is maybe not what you were expecting. This is a printed document done on the printing press of John Dunlop in Philadelphia. They order about 200 copies. And again, as we'll talk about in a minute, this fits in with the purpose of that document. You are probably expecting this. This is the engrossed version, or what is left of it, in the National Archives in Washington. This document did not get signed on July 4th. It was not proposed until July 19th, and it was not ready to be signed until August 2nd. We believe the majority of people signed the document on August 2nd, 1776. However, it appears that signing continues piecemeal for years as people who had been there when it was voted on and had left will trickle back into town. We think the last of the signers was Thomas McKean, and he may have signed that document as late as 1781. So now let's take a few. Sorry, this is what they use to sign it. Known as the Sing Inkstand. And if you go to Philadelphia and visit Independence National Historical Park, this inkstand is on display for you to see. So I apologize for my rudimentary markings, but I wanted to highlight the main sections of the document that I'm going to talk about. And this will help us answer the question of what this document was for. This document was not meant to be some guiding light, guiding principle for the future of the nation that it becomes. And there's a lot of reasons it could have become that. My personal theory is that it's just so profound, and the words are so beautiful. The ideas in the document were nothing that Jefferson did not sit down at his desk and just think up all of these things. Jefferson himself said he was just trying to explain the mind of the people in the colonies. Many of the words and phrases are lifted from other documents, but the way Jefferson puts those words together ends up being very powerful. In the very beginning, the section I marked with the red bracket on the right side of the document is basically an introduction, and it tells us what the document is for. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Right there they tell us the document is largely going to be a list of reasons for doing what they're doing. The next section marked in blue, well, that's the section that everybody knows. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The mission statement becomes the mission statement of the United States. Certainly we have not lived up to it. Certainly we still do not live up to it. But it is our guiding light that we attempt to live up to. The most radical part of the document is not that sentiment, though. In my opinion, the most radical part of it is the assertion that the government governs by the consent of the governed, and when those governed no longer consent to the government, it is their right to replace it with a new one. But there's a catch. One, you couldn't do it easily. And two, you had to explain why. Jefferson goes on to write, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over these states. And most importantly, to prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Those facts, as Jefferson and the Congress saw them, are marked by the green line on the right-hand side. The vast majority of this document is a listing of grievances against the King and Parliament. And if you haven't read them lately, I highly recommend it. It will give you a much fuller picture of what was going on at the time. The little blue part at the end or purple, I guess, is the part where they say, because of these reasons, we are leaving. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And you'll notice there is one name on it, John Hancock, the President of Congress, and one other one, I suppose, Charles Thompson, the Secretary of Congress, attesting to this document. They did not sign their names to this document. This was a statement from Congress, and it was a statement meant to simply explain why they were taking the actions that they were taking. So what is next? What is next is going to be what makes, in my opinion, makes this document so everlasting. In Philadelphia, there was an object that looked like this hanging on the wall of the Supreme Court chamber of the Pennsylvania State House, just across the room from the assembly room where they were meeting. On July 8, 1775, that document was read to the public in the back behind Independence, what we call Independence Hall. People stormed into the building. They tore this object down, this coat of arms. They drug it through the streets and destroyed it. In New York, George Washington has it read before the Continental Army on July 9th. The people and members of the Army respond by destroying the equestrian statue on the Bowling Green, the tip of Manhattan, of George III. There is an iconoclasm against all things royal throughout the colony. More copies are printed. In January of 1777, Mary Catherine Goddard prints the first edition of the document that included the names of all of the signers, becoming a statement of those men as opposed to a statement of Congress as a whole. The document was largely forgotten until the 1790s. It emerges as part of the birth of political parties, the party wars of the 1790s, when Jefferson's authoring of that document became politically useful. So what does this have to Herbert Hoover? Have to do with Herbert Hoover? Well, first of all, I think I take a rather broad view of what is relevant. Hoover becomes president, of course. He's a politician in the 1930s, early 1900s. Every politician of the 18 and 1900s was influenced by the words of the Declaration of Independence in one way or the other. But there is a direct line to Herbert Hoover, in my opinion, and his philosophy. Oh, sorry, one last thing. About Thomas Jefferson, this is his tombstone. He says on his tombstone, author of the Declaration of Independence, author of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Number one is author of the Declaration of Independence. I guess presidency doesn't rise up to the top three. Back to my direct line to Hoover. And that line is through Abraham Lincoln. This image shows Abraham Lincoln raising the flag in front of Independence Hall on February 22nd, 1861. Lincoln stops in Philadelphia on his way to Washington to take the oath of office. In a time where the United States is facing its greatest crisis since the beginning of that, or since that revolution. Lincoln is asked to give a speech, and he responds with an impromptu one in which he says, "I am filled with deep emotion at finding myself standing here in this place where were collected together the wisdom, the patriotism, the devotion to principle from which sprang the institutions under which we live. You have kindly suggested to me that in my hands is the task of restoring peace to the present distracted condition of the country. I can say in return, sir, that all the political sentiments I entertain have been drawn, so far as I have been able to draw them, from the sentiments which originated and were given to the world from this hall. I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence." He goes on to say that he would rather be assassinated if he could not save the nation on that basis. Fast forward a couple of months. On the 4th of July, 1861, Lincoln sends his first message to Congress. It had been called into special session to deal with the rebellion. This is essentially a people's contest. On the side of the Union, it is a struggle for maintaining in the world that form and substance of government whose leading object is to elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford all an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life. In 1922, Herbert Hoover writes a small pamphlet. It's called American Individualism. In that pamphlet, he attempts to explain why the American version of individualism is different than individualism on its own. In my opinion, this is the purest expression of Hoover's political philosophy until 1932, before 1932, when he is radicalized by his defeat in the presidential election that year. Hoover wrote, "Individualism cannot be maintained as the foundation of a society if it looks to only legalistic justice based upon contracts, property, and political equality. Such legalistic safeguards are themselves not enough. In our individualism, American individualism, we have long since abandoned the laissez-faire of the 18th century, the notion that it is every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. We abandoned that when we adopted the ideal of equality and opportunity, the fair chance of Abraham Lincoln." So thank you, folks. I actually was on time. I think Brad is going to come in now and
yeah, thank you, Garrett, for that presentation. We do have some questions from our viewers out there. And if you do have a question, I encourage you to mouse over the edges of your screen, typically at the bottom or at the top, and look for that Q&A icon and click that. That'll bring up a window where you can type in your questions, and we will get to those as quickly as we can. We do have a question from Karen, and she says, "Is the other declaration document with the signatures more significant because everyone signed it, or is it just symbolic?"
Well, I think that depends on the person, to be honest. So personal story, at Independence National Historical Park, you have Independence Hall in the middle of the block. And to the right of that building, as you're looking at it from the front, is a small building that was known as we call the East Wing. And in that building, there's a collection of documents called the Great Essentials. And there is a Dunlop broadside on display in that building. And I think anybody who has ever worked in that building can tell you, it seems like 10,000 questions every day that usually are something something in the neighborhood of, is it real? Where's the real one? So I am partial to the printed version, partially because that. The printed one was not treated, the engrossed version was not treated particularly well. It was hung on a wall, passed around for years, rolled up in a tube at times, so that's why it's not in great shape. I think Americans did come to see it as being very important because it came to be seen as this pledge of those men, sacrificing themselves. And you start seeing jokes and comments about, supposedly Ben Franklin said, "We shall all hang together or we'll all hang separately." Probably apocryphal, but it comes to be seen as a statement those men were making. In some ways, I think it's even more powerful as a statement from Congress as a whole, speaking for their constituents back in the States. But like I said, I think that's a personal question.
Mm-hmm. And along those lines, a question from Faith says, "Were all the colonists in favor of independence, or did they have to convince others to stand and fight? Because I guess they were, they're basically asking for people to go into war.
Yeah, so certainly by no means were all the colonists for independence or for the rebellion, and I think it really depended on when you're talking about, where you're talking about, and one of the big determining factors of that is, where is the British Army at the time? People tended to be much less in favor of independence when the army was knocking on their door or in their neighborhood. If you look at Massachusetts in 1775, 1776, the spirit of the rebellion was very strong. Almost everybody in Massachusetts was for independence. As the British thought, as you moved south, they were going to run into loyalists who would then help them to overthrow, in their view, this tyranny of these rebels. They thought they'd find it in New York, and there were a lot of loyalists in New York, but they didn't find what they were looking for. The war moved south. They thought they'd find them in South Carolina and North Carolina. They don't find them. There are large numbers of people who fight on both sides. This was a civil war in the British Empire, is the best way to think of it. As far as trying to put numbers on it, we just don't have the ability to do that, I don't think. There wasn't widespread polling or like we have now, or anything like that. But it is very safe to say that significant portions of the population remained loyal to the empire throughout the war.
Great. Well, Garrett, we do thank you again for your presentation and for all those who attended today. That's all the questions we have for now. So I encourage all of you to come and visit the Hoover campus this Father's Day weekend and enjoy a walk around the park and exploring the historic buildings, which just reopened this week. So on behalf of the Hoover Presidential Foundation, the National Historic Site, the Presidential Library and Museum, and the West Branch Public Library, we thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit to the Hoover campus.